And speaking of Democrats pushing much-needed legislation, this week, several Democratic members in the House of Representatives and in the Senate have proposed legislation called the Right to Vote Act. And what the Right to Vote Act, which, let's give credit here, you got Representative Mondaire Jones, Senators John Office and Alex Padilla. They introduced this piece of legislation on Wednesday. What it would do is would ensure that courts respect the right to vote as the fundamental right that it is. It is the first congressional guarantee of the right to vote in federal elections. It also solves the problem that we are seeing in certain states of election subversion. The bill would affirm Americans' right to vote by declaring election laws or rules that pose a severe or discriminatory burden to be illegitimate, unless the jurisdiction in question can prove that its proposed law or rule furthers a governmental interest and is the least restrictive means of doing so. So once again, we have Democrats in the House and in the Senate that are saying we have to do something to protect the right to vote for Americans. Close to 200 pieces of legislation being worked on across the country. We all know Texas right now is trying to be the latest to pass a massively restrictive voting bill. Georgia's already done it. Florida's already done it. Other states are trying to get it done as well. Federal legislation could circumvent this. Federal legislation could render all of these other pieces dead. Here's the problem. In some of the areas where this legislation has passed, and I'm not saying this would be effective, I'm just saying this is a possibility. You have states that have already passed these restrictive voting bills. If the federal government were to come out with federal legislation basically undoing these state bills, the states would actually have a pretty decent 10th Amendment case to bring against the government. You didn't have a law in place, so we put our own in place, and so ours existed prior to yours. It may not be the strongest legal argument, but I guarantee you we would see it coming out of these states. The states' rights groups would be fighting this tooth and nail. Doesn't mean it would be successful. It just means if something like the Right to Vote Act did end up passing, it would still have a long journey through the U.S. courts before finally becoming law of the land, to be honest, or possibly even being struck down by the United States Supreme Court that, as we all know, has a huge conservative slant right now. But all of that is future talk. And there's a time for future talk, and there's a time to just acknowledge that, yes, Democrats are actually working to do good things for the United States. And sometimes you just got to take a win when you can get a win. And sometimes that win is just the draft legislation, whether it's the Right to Vote Act, whether it's that, $500 billion fine that Sanders and Warren want to levy against fossil fuel companies. A win is a win. Cori Bush, with her protest essentially to extend the eviction moratorium, that worked. We may only get an extra 60 days of an eviction moratorium, but direct action produced a result. And Democrats are not sitting idly by. Some of them, because we all know some of them are, but some of them are not sitting idly by in Washington, D.C., watching as Republicans strip voting rights away from constituents because that's the only way they can stay in power. They've admitted that too many times over just the past year for us to not acknowledge that that is why this is happening. Republicans know that the public changes. Demographics shift. People's viewpoints change. Look at polling on issues stripped away from politicians or political parties. And on the issues, America's actually very progressive. That only changes when you attach a political ideology or a specific politician to the policy, by the way. Something to keep in mind when you see these numbers. Americans support these things. Republicans support these things. They support the infrastructure bill. They support action to rein in climate change. They support raising taxes on corporations. The wind is at your back, Democrats. I want to see more of this. Not just because I want you to prove that you can fight, but because I actually have a vested interest as an American in watching everybody's lives get better. I'm Farron Cousins, and for David Pakman, we'll be right back.
Let's be honest, most healthy snack bars are not exciting like my live streams. And that's why you should check out our sponsor, Monk Pack. Monk Pack Keto Nut and Seed Bars are sweet and delicious, soft and chewy with a big satisfying crunch. But each bar has just 1 gram of sugar, 2 to 3 net carbs, and just 150 calories. So it's great for someone on a keto or low carb diet, or even if you just want a tasty, sweet snack without the sugar. Monk Pack Keto Nut and Seed Bars come in great flavors like sea salt dark chocolate, caramel sea salt, or caramel, you choose, and peanut butter dark chocolate. I always have a box of these ready to go in my pantry, which is easy when you do the optional monthly subscription, which also saves you 10%. If you have a sweet tooth, this is the way to indulge without the guilt, whether it's for breakfast or in the car or after a workout. Go to monkpack.com. The link is under this video, and you'll save 20% when you use code PAKMAN at checkout.